I'm an Eagle Scout from Ohio, and I spend a lot of time camping. On most trips, I like to go fishing. It's a good way to get a break from the younger scouts. This particular camping trip started off as usual. We ate, played capture the flag, and enjoyed ourselves. When it got dark, most people went to bed, but my friend and I decided to head out for some late-night fishing around midnight. The lake was about 1.5 miles from camp, but the walk felt like part of the adventure, so we didn't mind. When we got to the lake, the familiar sounds of crickets and frogs filled the air. We settled down, set up our fishing poles, and took in the peaceful view. About 45 minutes later, though, something strange happened. All the nighttime noises just stopped. The usual sounds of nature went completely silent, and the quiet was so intense it felt louder than any noise we'd heard. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that sudden silence is rarely a good sign. We started to feel uneasy. After a few tense moments in that eerie silence, we decided to head back to camp. Just as we were gathering our gear, we heard a loud screech from across the lake, followed by the sound of branches snapping. Frozen with fear, we listened as whatever was making the noise seemed to come closer, circling around the lake. It moved slowly but steadily in our direction. Both my friend and I know the usual animal sounds around here, but this was unlike anything we'd ever heard. We were terrified, each clutching our pocket knives, though we doubted they'd be much help. At only 15 years old, we were no match for whatever was out there, especially since it seemed to be breaking branches with ease. Looking for a place to hide, we spotted an old bathroom structure with a door hanging on by just a few hinges. We bolted over and crouched inside, trying to stay as quiet as possible. We could hear movement near the lake, and though I'm naturally curious, I was too scared to look out. But finally, I worked up the nerve to peek through a small window. What I saw chilled me to the bone. Standing where we'd just been fishing was a pale, skinny figure with long arms and what looked like claws at the ends. As if it sensed it was being watched, it turned and looked right at me. I quickly ducked back down, and we locked the door, pressing ourselves to the floor. Then we heard scratching outside the bathroom. We didn't dare look, but it wasn't just the scratching that got to us. A voice called out, "Scouts, what are you doing in there?" It sounded like our scoutmaster, but off, like the voice had been twisted into something unnatural. We stayed huddled together, terrified, listening to that thing outside until finally, as dawn approached, the noises faded. After the sun had fully risen, around 9:30 a.m., we cautiously stepped out, shaken and pale. We returned to camp and swore to keep what happened to ourselves. Only recently, while reading about Native American legends, did we realize that what we might have encountered was a Wendigo. Since then, we decided that if we ever went night fishing again, we'd bring more protection. A part of me is still curious to know if it really was a Wendigo or something else entirely, but when we returned, our fishing poles were gone, and to this day, we still don't know what happened to them. This took place back in 2007 when I was just 9. My family is big on the outdoors, and that summer, like every other, we went camping. My dad, my 2 brothers, Luke, who was 15, and Owen, who was 12, and I headed to Virginia for our trip. I can't recall the name of the spot, but it was surrounded by thick woods and had a stunning lake nearby. We pitched our tent close to the water, and the first few days were filled with lots of outdoor fun. On the morning of our 4th day, my brothers and I woke up early, excited to go swimming. There was a large lake not too far from our tent, though we couldn't actually see it from where we camped. After a quick breakfast, we threw on our swim trunks, grabbed some fishing gear just in case, and made our way to the lake. My older brother Luke was especially keen to check out the fishing pier there. When we arrived, we noticed 2 people already fishing, a man in his 40s and his son, who looked about 14. Seeing us in our swim trunks, the boy stood up and said, "I wouldn't swim there if I were you, lots of garfish around, and they can give you a nasty cut." I glanced at Owen, who just shrugged, and without a second thought, he dove right in. Not wanting to miss out, I jumped in after him, while Luke stayed on the shore, setting up his fishing line and chatting with the other boy. We swam around for about 15 minutes, slowly drifting further from the shore. The water was incredibly deep, probably around 20 feet, but Owen and I didn't worry too much. Both of us were strong swimmers, thanks to swim team back home. At one point, I was underwater with my eyes closed, enjoying the coolness, when I suddenly felt a hand grab my ankle. Startled, I opened my eyes, trying to shake off what I assumed was Owen. But when I looked down, I saw something completely unexpected. It wasn't Owen, it was a creature with long bluish-green hair swirling around its head, completely black eyes, and elongated legs ending in webbed feet. Its claws looked like a cat's, curved and sharp. I watched in horror as it opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth, and it started pulling me deeper into the dark water. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively kicked, letting out a scream underwater, accidentally releasing air. I managed to kick the creature with my free foot, desperate to break away. As I struggled, the creature scratched my leg with its sharp claws, sending a wave of pain through me. I saw a cloud of red rise in the water as blood started drifting around me. My strength was fading, and my vision began to blur. As I was sinking, I remember feeling a strange sense of calm, thinking I'd drown before it could hurt me more. Just when I thought it was over, I felt strong hands pull me upwards. When we broke the surface, I was gasping for air, and my leg throbbed with pain. Luke and Owen helped me back to the campsite, and we woke up Dad, who rushed me to the emergency room. After cleaning the wound, the doctor said I didn't need stitches, though I was left with faint scars as a reminder of that day. Later, Luke and Owen told me they got worried when I didn't come up, so they both dove in to find me. They mentioned seeing something swimming away quickly when they spotted me, but it disappeared before they could get a good look. When I told everyone about the strange creature I'd seen, they didn't believe me, saying it was probably one of the garfish the boy had warned us about. But I know what I saw, and my eyes didn't deceive me that day. To this day, I still wonder what that creature was, and I'd really like to know if anyone has any idea what it might have been. A friend of mine, we'll call him John, has always enjoyed fishing and spending time alone in nature. After we finished school, we lost touch for a bit, but last month I ran into him at a grocery store, and he had a remarkable story to share. John loved fishing, so he often rode out to lakes filled with trout to catch fresh fish for dinner. Around here, there's plenty of secluded fishing spots surrounded by endless woods, with only the occasional road, lake, or scattered house on the outskirts. One of these lakes has a haunted reputation. Local legends say it's where young people used to dance on Midsummer's Eve. The story goes that a bride-to-be danced with a mysterious man in black, and as they danced, her feet bled. He then pulled her into the lake, and since that day, no grass has grown on that spot. I've seen both the lake and the barren area myself. Anyway, John packed up his bike and gear and headed out to one of these lakes. He passed the haunted lake but kept going to a different one, which had a more pleasant atmosphere and fewer eerie vibes. The area around this lake had an open meadow full of flowers, bordered by dark, old trees, and a windbreak near the water. In Swedish summer, it never gets entirely dark, even late at night, so there's always a faint glow in the sky. Around dusk, a mist rises from the lake, creating ghostly shapes that appear to dance, what we call the elf dance. John spent his evening fishing and grilling his catch over a fire. The only sounds were the eerie calls of seabirds echoing across the lake. When he grew tired, he went to a small shed by the lake, unrolled his sleeping bag, and kept his large hunting knife close by, just in case. He was almost asleep when he heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming from the meadow behind the shed. The shed's small window faced the lake, but all he could see was the sky and the dark. The footsteps sounded deliberate, as if someone in heavy boots was marching toward him. John shouted, "Who's there?" His voice echoed over the lake, and the footsteps stopped. He waited, his heart pounding, but there was only silence. He wondered if someone was playing a trick on him. But if it was a joke, why didn't they respond or keep moving? Now tense, he gripped his knife and positioned himself against the wall, holding the blade in front of him. The silence was oppressive. He couldn't tell if whoever had been approaching was still nearby or had left quietly. He waited for what felt like forever, maybe 15 minutes, when suddenly a shadowy figure lunged into the shed, launching straight at him. Reacting instinctively, John held out his knife, and he felt something heavy press against it before the figure turned and bolted out of the shed, disappearing into the night. Without wasting a second, John grabbed his things and ran in the opposite direction, sprinting as fast as he could. He didn't stop until he reached the nearest houses, banging on the first door he came across, even though it was the middle of the night. He'd left his bike and anything else he couldn't carry behind in his rush to escape. When I spoke with him about it, he confirmed the details, saying the whole experience was surreal. Oddly, there wasn't much cover by the lake where someone could disappear, but somehow, that large, dark figure had vanished without a trace. I've lived by this pond for over 18 years. When I first moved here, it was a small pond on a farm, surrounded by fields and dense woods. But over the years, the area changed. Now, the pond is nestled between 3 large neighborhoods and a public swimming pool, with only a thin strip of wood separating it from all the development. I believe the pond dates back to the early 1900s, and there's an old cross-shaped section of barbed wire lying in the water. I never figured out why the barbed wire is there, as there were only 2 very old houses to one side and a neighborhood about 100 yards away, near the woods on the other side. Growing up, my friends and I were fascinated by the pond. We'd come up with all sorts of mysterious stories about it, but none of us dared to explore it much. Then, about 10 years later, I got really into fishing. After school, I'd head out almost every day to scout new fishing spots, and nowhere was as accessible or filled with fish as this pond. I ended up coming here almost every other day. One summer night, something strange happened. I had stayed out late, hoping to catch a few more fish, when a bright light suddenly shone behind me, like the headlights of a truck. I spun around, assuming a car had parked in one of the driveways at the houses about 100 yards behind me through the woods. But there was nothing there, and the angle of the light didn't make sense. It couldn't have come from headlights. Spooked, I decided to pack up and head home, following the trail that led past the pool parking lot nearby. Months later, something else unusual happened at the pond. One evening, a friend and I, along with a couple of girls, were hanging out at the same spot. While we were there, we noticed a little kid, maybe 3 or 5 years old, running from an old house across the pond. Concerned, we asked him where his parents were and what he was doing out there, but he barely paid attention to us. Then, suddenly, he turned around and started talking to someone we couldn't see, as if responding to questions. It seemed like this someone was trying to get him to go back to his parents, but the kid was arguing, saying he just wanted to stay and play. Then, something even stranger happened. The kid pointed toward the pond and said, "Look, there's my dog. Do you see him?" He pointed to the center of the pond and insisted his dog was there, barking at him. When we asked where his dog was, he replied, "He's in the water. That's where he drowned a year ago." We all fell silent, stunned, then helped the kid back across the pond, where his dad met him and took him home. Kids have vivid imaginations, and it's not uncommon for them to make up imaginary friends, but this felt different. It genuinely seemed like the boy was talking to someone we couldn't see, and he was reacting to a conversation. I've seen and heard a lot of strange things around this pond over the years, and maybe someday I'll share more of those stories. I attended an exclusive college, and I really enjoyed my time there. But there's one unsettling experience I'll never forget. Around 7 p.m., I returned to my dorm after grabbing dinner at the cafeteria. As I headed back to my room, I noticed something unusual. A man was walking down the hallway. Now, my dorm was strictly for females, so seeing a man there was odd. I figured he might be visiting someone, which happened occasionally, but he looked like he was in his 30s, which felt out of place. I didn't think too much of it and continued to my room. It was a Friday, and my roommate had gone home for the weekend. After finishing my assignments for the weekend, I settled in to watch some TV. About an hour later, I got up to use the bathroom across the hall. When I returned, I resumed my show, completely absorbed in it. About 10 minutes later, I heard a faint noise from the other side of the room. I was so focused on my show that I brushed it off, but then I heard it again, louder this time. I turned to look, and to my shock, I saw a man stepping out from behind my roommate's desk. It was the same man I'd seen in the hallway earlier. He had a strange smile on his face and was walking straight toward me. Panicking, I screamed and bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me as I escaped. I ran down the hall, my heart pounding. He didn't follow me but shouted, claiming it was a misunderstanding and that he thought I was someone else. With that unsettling smile, though, I didn't trust him. I rushed upstairs to my friend's dorm, and we called campus security. They arrived quickly and managed to catch him leaving the building. It turned out that someone had let him inside earlier, and he'd entered my room because I'd left the door unlocked when I went to the bathroom. I felt both relieved and terrified, realizing how narrowly I'd avoided something far worse. I believe in the paranormal, and this experience ranks as one of the most terrifying I've ever had. It all began when my dad shared a story with me. Years ago, he and his ex-girlfriend had visited an old, forgotten graveyard in a remote part of South Carolina. Locals call this graveyard witches and Morlocks due to its graves dating back to the 1600s and 1700s. Across from the graveyard is a very old farm, now private property. Long ago, this farm had a well where slaves were reportedly drowned. While they were exploring the graveyard, my dad and his girlfriend heard strange noises. They even managed to capture the sounds on his night camera. He described the sound as a sizzling noise coming from the trees, but there was nothing nearby that could have made it. The closest source was miles away. The noise grew louder, and eventually, they left the area in a hurry. Fast forward 19 years, and my dad and I were driving through that same area while he recounted the story of the haunted well. Since it was dark, I couldn't see the well, but just hearing the story made me feel both excited and uneasy. As we continued deeper into the old, abandoned woods, a black dog startled us, adding to the atmosphere. I watched the dark treetops and the dirt road, taking in the eerie, old fences that bordered the fields with the well. Shapes seemed to emerge from the tall grass, faces and silhouettes, like when you see images in clouds. My dad warned me that the deeper we went, the more unsettling it would feel, and he was right. The sense of tension kept building. We finally reached the edge of the forest, where the abandoned farm shed was still visible. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of unmarked graves scattered through the tall grass. Feeling a mix of dread and fascination, I peered into the graveyard through my open window. I blinked and then saw something hovering over one of the graves. It looked like a white dress with puffy sleeves and a faint, tattered hem. I could make out a pale arm peeking through the sleeve, and even now, that image is burned into my mind as clearly as a photograph. Suddenly, my excitement turned to nausea, and a wave of fear washed over me. I told my dad about the dress, and he brushed it off, saying it was probably just a smudge on the window. But the window was open. We shone our flashlights over the dead grass, hoping to catch another glimpse of whatever I'd seen. The fear gripped me tighter, and I begged my dad to drive us out of there. Part of me, though, wanted to return, hoping to catch another sight of that dress. My dad laughed, suggesting it was probably just my imagination, but I knew it was something real. The nausea wasn't from food, it was pure, raw fear. When I flashed my light over the graveyard, there was nothing there, no dress, no figure. Yet I was sure of what I'd seen, right over the top of a small grave, about 3 feet tall. My heart was pounding, my skin prickling with fear. Since then, I can't shake the feeling of wanting to go back, to see if the dress appears again. Maybe this Halloween, I'll muster the courage to revisit that place. I'm scared, but something keeps drawing me back, urging me to see it just one more time.